he was taking a nap during the whole setup of this, and then I hit record, and he's like, "Let's go." Yo, what's up? This episode is brought to you by Zohan. This is my baby. What's up, Bubs? He is probably going to spend the majority of this episode eating my hand. So I start this episode with two hands. I will finish with one. Luckily, that's all I need. All right. We are back. This is the Drigo Rose podcast. I am Drigo Rose. I got a few things that I wanted to talk about this week. A couple things that I wanted to get out of the way, though. One side note, I'm kind of still playing with the audio, trying to see what works. The first episode, though, is fine. The audio came out really, really low, so I'm gonna bump it up. I don't have it up all the way, but I don't want to catch the exterior sounds because there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of background sound in here, and then there's the dog who's adding to it all, and so I want to kind of keep a balance between low audio, and or having the audio be too low and then having it be too high to where you could hear, unnecessary things. Anyways, we're back. It's been a little while. Yeah, saw a few things that I wanted to, that at least caught my attention these past few days. And actually, that's right. I do want to get something out of the way. I completely forgot that I did want to dedicate this episode. I almost forgot. Whew, that was close. I did want to dedicate the episode to somebody who's already taken the time to make a comment on here. We're going to dedicate this episode to @junior-DZ4ZO. First off, thanks for watching, brother. Even if it was just for a second. Bless up. He mentioned a second episode in his, weak attempt at a jab, when he could have just saved a word and just said like first and last episode, but he mentioned a second in between. So if you wanted a second episode, you could have just asked my boy. Te lo prometo. You could have just asked me. I got you. This one's just for you, Junior. Pero vaya con cuidado. All right. Anyways, again, thanks for watching, buddy. So, speaking of things and people to ban, I want to take a look into this ban on TikTok. And then real quick, I wanted to take a look at that. Some shit I came across, self-checkouts, and then some wild stuff about Boeing. The wild stuff about Boeing, like while I was writing the script, really took me off the rails, and I feel as if I didn't even put in that much effort now into these like first two topics. So I'm going to knock the first two of them out just because I found them to be like really interesting talking points. And then, we'll get to the stuff about Boeing. So the first thing that caught my attention, like I said, is this ban on TikTok. The reason why it caught my attention is for a few reasons, because it's subtly serious. The name and the app and the intent with the app seems very harmless and silly. There's a war in Ukraine. There's a war in Israel, basically. So, the U.S. is falling apart with what appears to be some senile old man at the helm of it all. And regardless of all that, here you have in the midst, a headline about TikTok, and it's like, oh shit, all right, what do they got to talk about now? But now it's about a ban, and this isn't the first time that a ban on TikTok has been brought up. However, I have my personal reasons as to why it's coming back up now, but there are some legitimate reasons, and there are as follows. First and foremost, we need to decide. We need to come to a decision, because we're just letting this like idea of banning it. Just kind of like, why even talk about it if you're not going to do anything about it? You have to come to a decision. This is something that should be relatively simple in the scope of everything. You can't fight wars and then have an issue whether or not as a country to decide if you're going to ban a social media platform. Now the justification for that, we'll get to it in a second, but nonetheless, if it's a decision that you can't make and publicly put it out there, then there's a lot at that point that just raises even more questions about the logistics of how problems are solved here in the United States. Anyways, let's get into it. China, in this case, is subtly worried about not being able to access all of our data. That's like the general scope of it, right? They're not going to flat out say that, but come on, that's really at the core of the Chinese perspective on here. And I do want to note a couple things about China now that we're talking about them. One is you do not underestimate the Chinese. The whole reason why this app is being talked about as a nation, and to the extent that it's being used, I mean, nobody or no group or no company that is just completely dumb gonna have this sort of effect and this sort of controversy on the back of it. So do not underestimate the Chinese. Second, on about them, there's quite a few headlines. I didn't really take the time to copy and paste them. Excuse me. I had some fast food. But their view on the matter, of course, if we were to go into the direction of banning it, is that they think that it's not justified and that we're hypocrites, for not allowing something to flow in the capitalistic structure, which that's part of their propaganda. Is that the thing about, like, on a slight segue, the thing about propaganda is that there's always like an element of truth. It's not the truth. There's like elements of the truth, right? There's things that you can't be like, well, yeah, I guess so, So it builds a lot of gray area. And so back to this, they're sharing a lot of their opinions. And so all I can say is whether or not they agree with the ban or not, their opinion is irrelevant. That's just how it is. I say do not underestimate them, but that also doesn't mean that we let them influence our decisions. And I know that really only matters on a top of the hierarchy, politician sort of level. But us as Americans, we also have to, just as normal citizens, we have to really not take into account the opinion of other countries. At the end of the day, it's the U.S. that everybody comes running to. There's a lot of those micro conversations and micro debates about, who's the greatest country on earth. There's a few other countries that run democracies, but look, let's face it. At the end of the day, who's your daddy? Like, every country comes running to the U.S. for help. Right now, as another slight segue, the U.S. is, this isn't my claim. I heard this claim, but I sort of, like, it makes sense and I agree with it to an extent. So I'll take the hit or whatever as well. But, we are essentially running the Ukrainian government. The amount of money that's flowing through there. Without the U.S., I have no idea what Ukraine would be like right now. And I don't think it would be for the best. So with that said, the opinions of other countries do not matter, and I cannot stress that enough. The world is watching, and that's a responsibility that we have to take great care of, but that doesn't mean we take every single opinion seriously, especially from countries that are known to not have, at the very minimum, the same values and moral structures that we do. So let's carry on. So again, the Chinese are subtly worried about not being able to access all of our data. From the creators are now worried, right? So we have China, And then we have the creators who are being affected. The creators are worried, of course, and whose main argument right now is that their livelihoods are at stake or at risk. First off, I don't know what will end up happening, but I don't have any expectations regarding either outcome. So, let's proceed. So we have China, right? I know I keep repeating it, but I just kind of want to break these groups of people into segments. So we have the Chinese, who are subtly worried about not being able to access all of our data. Then we have the creators, who are worried, of course, because they think that their livelihoods are at risk. That's another argument in and of itself. And then we have legitimate buyers who are occupied with the algorithm, or at least the purchase of the algorithm. The specifics matter on that topic because the application as a whole is not something that American legitimate buyers are worried about. It's the algorithm. Those are two different things. Yes, they are all in one in the app and under the umbrella of TikTok, but it's the algorithm that's really worth the dough. So we have to just keep that in mind. So we have Chinese, the creators, and then we have legitimate American buyers. I think Kevin O'Leary wanted to buy it, and he's Canadian, but I'd rather not have. My view on this is I would just rather not have the Chinese government being able to access all of our data. Whether or not that means banning TikTok, I don't care. It's more or less the Chinese being able to access our data. That's a no good. That's no bueno. So, what else? Oh yeah. So in regards to the argument that creators are posting, of course, there's a lot of headlines on that, so those are pretty easy to find. I got a couple in him. I got a couple of them here, which I'll paste in the description. And actually, I do want to delve into that. Actually, a few more things. The country as a whole is watching in some sense, and we get to see if our government has the right to ban an app. It's a Chinese app, but just how capitalistic are we? And I think that's where the Chinese government really targets their propaganda that they send over here. Because in a way, it's true. If the American government bans a private corporation, especially if it's a social media app, one in which things like free speech can seem like it's being suppressed, forget about it. That's no bueno. That's no bueno. I think that the thing that really justifies it, I shouldn't say really justifies it. That's a terrible term. One of the things that has an element of justification for it is the fact that that ByteDance is owned, that ByteDance is a Chinese corporation, and Chinese corporations take their orders from the Chinese government. So, what do you do? I think other countries, especially ones that are a legitimate threat to national security, if they have information on us, as opposed to not, I mean, I'd rather take the latter option. To me, it's a very easy concept. Now, that's the beauty of it, is that you don't have to ban the app with that option, because if we have a legitimate buyer here in the States, at the very least, somebody like Kevin O'Leary, that's more workable. It's a lot easier to work with those kinds of folks, even if you're one of those folks that's like, oh, I hate rich people, whatever. Okay, fine. So you hate them, but again, it's much better them than the Chinese government being able to access all of our data. It's a very simple concept, and you don't have to ban the app for that. As an aside, I do want to take a look into the argument that the creators are posting, of course, because again, their main argument is that their livelihoods are at risk. I have a couple news articles that I'll paste in the description. This is an interesting perspective because though it's true to an extent, it's all presupposed that a specific risk is the bigger effect of this. Presuppose of that specific risk is the bigger effect of this, and I disagree. I don't think that that's on the side of the normal consumer and creator, like the general public. I'll just put those two kinds of under the general public. The general public has much bigger things to worry about than their livelihoods from TikTok, even if you get into the specifics of the creators, because one, you should never put all your eggs in one basket if you're running a business. I'm no multi-billionaire business owner, but I feel like that's just a concept that you just don't do with anything really. You just, even in relationships, partnerships. I don't know. I don't want to get carried away with that. You just don't put all your eggs in one basket. So there's that side of it. Then there's many creators who have kids, and I believe that you could. I don't think it's very weird to say that like your livelihood is at risk, and you're like an adult with kids. I don't have kids, and I find that to be pretty silly. There's no other options. That there's things like Instagram, there's YouTube, there's so many social media platforms, and like the algorithms, of course, are relatively different, but I don't think that all of a sudden everything is absolutely over for you. So to say that your livelihoods are at risk, I don't know. I think you could say at most certain hobbies are at risk, and that just at the table of negotiation where you have the Chinese and then you have very rich, legitimate buyers. I just don't think that things are like, oh yeah, but are my hobbies? It's my hobbies. Like, stop. That doesn't have much of an effect on anything. It's not to say that the public isn't taken seriously, but I don't know. Anyways, as an aside regarding the general public and TikTok, let's face it. If there is anybody in the general public that is at risk, or anything in the general public that is at risk, let's face it, it's the kids. You know what I'm saying? It's just no good. I mean, it's wild how even adults, I'll even say, including myself, can get hooked on the app. I am so guilty, extremely guilty of going to the bathroom to drop a deuce and then sitting on there for like 35 minutes, and then like my ass and my legs are all asleep, bro. Like I just been sitting on that shit for way too long, and then like I was done shitting after about 7 minutes, but then the rest was just like OT. OT on TikTok. It's just like, it's ridiculous. And so I've had to nonstop go back and forth between installing and uninstalling the app, because I could just even see it in myself that it gets to be very unhealthy. It's not just TikTok, it's that whole format of scrolling. But it's extremely mind numbing. It's not good. And because I have things to do, the urgency of those things kind of like wake me up and be like, all right, yeah, you gotta fucking put that shit down. But again, circling this back now to the kids, is a lot of them, they're kids, they're coming home from school. They're like, all right, now I have a free day. I want to do this or play with that. And there they have, their phone, and they have the TikTok app, and they could just sit there. And I believe, I don't have the citation for this, but I believe the average use among like early teens on TikTok or something like that is like 9 hours per day of screen time, like 9 hours of screen time per day. That is wild. absolutely wild, you know. And so then it's really up to the parents. And I'm not, look, you do whatever it is that you do as a parent, as long as it's ethical, man. You know, you do whatever it is you want to do. But if you're a parent who's making the argument against this ban on TikTok, that it's your livelihoods are at risk, you could probably focus on the kids rather than yourself. You know, if it's like you're just putting them to the side and it's like it's me who's in trouble. Like, bro, you know, like the kid can't do shit, bro. The kid's gonna follow you. So it's, you know, you could always do something else, but you know, if we don't take care of that, and the thing is again, even and that's taking that route of argument. If you zoom out, the reality of it is like, yo, both the adults and kids will eventually find different routes, different means of interacting with social media, whether it's monetarily or just straight up consumerism. So I don't think that they're really relevant in the debate. That may sound pretty messed up to say, but it's right. Like, do you follow? You know, there's just always going to be different media they're just targeting this one specifically because of one, how good the algorithm is, and then two, the data collection, and then who's owning it, and then who gets to see it. You know, so it's not really about like the app as a whole, and that they're even banning it because it's having negative effects on mental health across the board. So anyways, where were we? Let's see here. Just trying to figure out my notes here. Okay, so I guess to kind of tie the knot on that, the real list. So the real list, with everything being said, the real list of concerns are in following order from most to least. At least the ones that we talked about. Who controls the algorithm? I think, and that's separate from the data access. I think who controls the algorithm is the thing that we should mostly be concerned about regarding this topic. China, an American buyer, or a wild card entity, you know, like Elon, Instagram, etc. Any of those can be the owner. Like right now, China is the owner. So what's the final say in how the app is utilized, or what's even in the app that's being utilized at the end of the day regarding this topic? What else? So yeah, we have who controls the algorithm, again separate from data access, the effect on America's youth, and then is who has access to our data and the level of severity to access our data. As bad as this sounds, I put this one last on the concern list because controlling or governing parties and or private entities even have access to our data pretty much all the time. And if anybody really wanted to access your data, they probably could. You know, you'd have to be some sort of CIA spy agent who's not blown their cover to kind of get away from it. Or you probably just don't use any sort of technology at all, and that's how you could probably get away. But if that's the case, you're not even watching this. Therefore, if you are watching this, you know, all of us can be tracked. You know, there's no hiding it. Again, it's really just like, do you want China knowing about shit? So that's why I kind of put them on the worry list. And this list, by the way, is my view. I put the effect on America's youth second on the list, even though before I said that it's not really relevant to the conversation. It's not relevant to the conversation, and I believe that that's not relevant to the conversation in regards to the actual making of the deal. You know, whenever all the paperwork is being filed and things of that nature. I think that things like that are going to be irrelevant. But zoom out away from the businessmen and politicians, I think that who controls the algorithm is the thing at the top of the concern list, and then the effect on America's youth is the second one, and then again the access and level of the level of access to our data is not much of a concern for me because our access is being accessed all the time. So, Drigo's take on this, I still don't think it's all that complicated, even after reading a few articles and kind of getting updated on the topic. I still don't really think it's all that complicated. I also don't think much is going to change from the consumer creator perspective because social media platforms come and go anyways. I think that's kind of what I was trying to say before. Even the ones that are out right now, YouTube, Instagram, or whatever, in the future, we might not even see those, which would be kind of wild, especially for YouTube because of how many freaking videos are on there. In any case, though, the platforms come and go, so I don't think much is going to change from the consumer creator perspective, or at least the route that it was taking in evolution. I don't think it's going to change much. TikTok is just a vessel by which the evolution takes place. So there's that. There might be some relatively big changes, of course, and it's sort of in the short term. Things like the government banning the app are going to be some big changes because then it's not even about the app anymore. It's just about the capabilities of a government on private entities and corporations. So I think those are the sorts of changes that we might see. Other than that, though, I don't really see much going on. If I had to choose between China or America owning the app, I choose America, hands down. Regarding livelihood, do we worry about the adults who can make adaptations, changes, and shifts to their business style, or do we worry about the youth who don't get to change much themselves nor have social development yet to articulate each piece of media they are consuming, and whose development for life is also the thing being affected? For me, it's not even a debate, blah, blah, blah. Tongue twister. For me, it's not even a debate on that one. But let me know in the comments what you think on that. It's, again, of all the wild things that are happening in the world, the headline about TikTok anything just seems silly, but the reality of it is that there's a lot on the line here, a lot at stake, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I can't stress it enough that I don't really have any expectations for what's going to happen, but I am interested to see what does happen and how it plays out. So there's that. Now, switching it up a little bit, I came across an article on self-checkouts. Speaking of like silly headlines, right? I think this one's pretty wild, but I came across this article on self-checkouts. Let me also get a little bit more stoned here. That's a blinker, baby. All right. So, I have been ignorant on the domain of self-checkouts. Let me just put it that way. That's kind of why I found this to be sort of like a silly topic to talk about. So, in reading some of the articles when I first saw the initial headline, I'm like, nah, this is fucking self-checkouts. Like, what could possibly be the deal with self-checkouts? But then it clicked. Why am I bringing up self-checkouts? Let me start here. Yeah, let me start here. It clicked while I was reading the headline. No, actually, no. I think this is how it went. Sorry, I'm mixing things up. A couple weeks ago, I went to Target, and it was kind of like towards closing time, but it was probably still like another hour and a half before they close. I used to work at Target years ago. I know that really doesn't mean much. And when I get there, grab all my stuff, I go to check out, and then I realized that the self-checkout lanes were closed. All of them. Like the entire section was closed off. And it was like this big deal, right? And so they even had workers there like, yeah, no, it's closed. It's like a whole thing. And so I was like, well, fuck it. They're closed. We got no option. So I got in line. It felt really 2005 again. I was just standing in line with like my arm full of things. It's like, kind of reminds me of like when you're kids and, you go to the store with your parents, into any store really. And then, because you guys are going to get things, but you're not going to get enough things to make use of a cart. So you kind of just carry things by your hand. They're like, mijo, hold this, So you're sitting there fucking like this. And so yeah, felt really like early 2000s again. So I was being real old school. I was like, okay, this feels nice. And I was waiting. It felt great for about a minute. And then I was like, all right, I got to fucking go. It's like, no way. It's kind of wild how we used to really stand in line for tens of minutes, like 30, 40 minutes easily. Unbelievable. And so that's what essentially ended up happening. I was in line for about 30 minutes. The young cashiers, they don't give a fuck. It's late night. I think it was probably a Friday, so everybody's trying to go home. So this is boop, boop. I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but like if I'm trying to go home, I'm trying to eat real quick. But nope, I guess they're like, chewing bubble gum, blowing bubbles, and boop, boop. Anyways, so they were going super slow, standing in line for 30 minutes. And I don't know, this whole thing was just like, it was a whole experience, right? Then 2 weeks later, I come across this article. So why am I bringing up self-checkouts? I like obscurities that point to answers and or questions that we didn't think of before. So years ago, self-checkouts scared the hell out of like the public. You know what I'm saying? At least scared the hell out of traditional folk. I remember it catching my attention. I was old enough once automated checkouts, were starting to become a thing. I was like, oh shit, because I don't think I was old. I had to have been probably like maybe 11, 12 years old or so. I don't really know when the first self-checkouts came out, but I just remember I was at that age where I knew in a few years I'm going to start working, but I wasn't old enough to really like work yet. And so it did catch my attention. And then I remember my pops would also talk about it as well. And so, yeah, I remember it being a thing. And so again, it scared the hell out of traditional folk. They were saying things like, there aren't going to be any jobs. This is going to devalue basic work, because you have to remember, to traditional folk, self-checkouts, the automation of the job of the automation of the job of grocery checking out, and now just shopping in general, that served as the epitome for how can I say, that served as the epitome for what, how can I say this properly? It represented what the future looked like, and it gave a justification to put the brakes on it if you're somebody who's not really knowledgeable in that domain. It's not to say that everybody who's freaked out about it didn't know. Some people were smart and they had reason to be fearful of automation, because look at us now. You want to talk about automation. So in a way, to a good extent, those things did happen. A lot of those like fears, quote unquote fears, did happen. I've seen my grocery store, when it's packed, run on like 10 cashiers. You know what I'm saying? And things are still moving. So the self-checkouts, especially from a business perspective, are amazing. It's labor that you don't have to pay for, and you get the output flow is not stopped. There's no bottlenecks, or at the very minimum, the bottlenecks that are created aren't usually situated within like people. It's usually some other factor. So that said, however, we've hit a gray area in like the big box stores here, which isn't all defining in the topic of AI computers, but there are questions to be asked. The reason why we hit a gray area in the big box stores is because, let me put it like this: closing self checkouts bring back human eyes and interaction on customers and their respective products. So when I say that we've hit a gray area in the big box stores, I mean it like this: that this effect was brought upon these stores because of their theft issues. There's no hiding it, and a lot of, I think even Walmart has admitted to that. And I think in the past few weeks, I think we were even seeing their subscription program where that's what you can use for self checkouts. I can't say from a business perspective, I can't say that I disagree. From a consumer, I was already kind of annoyed that Walmart closed their idea of 24/7 stores. Now they actually close at some point. What the hell is up with that? So I think they're already beyond some sort of line, so I'm not really shocked. It sucks. I'm not like hooray about it. When I say I agree, I don't say it proudly. Nonetheless, essentially a legal and moral code was broken to achieve a goal. And it's, again, from a business perspective, it's kind of like, what can you say? How much can you really blame what's going on? I will say, at the root of it all, private corporations in America are running here because of how America is set up. And I'm not going into all the political details of where we were and where we are now. There are going to be a few folk that know me and know my views on that. And as an aside, I can say, I told you so. But things right now in our government are not set up for businesses to run smoothly, especially in big cities. It's just not set up. And when companies do things like this and the public reacts negatively, it's like, well, some of y'all voted for how things played out, and here we are. So just remember that whenever you go to the polls. So can you really blame them, What else here? AI is going to be incredibly powerful, but I wonder to what extent it can correct errors, especially if some errors are perpetually reacting to said corrections. The thing about human nature is we always find a way. And that's a very vague statement. But Walmart's theft issue is not going to hit zero. But there's always like a just enough point though, right? Because right now these companies are suffering big. And if you're Walmart, your number one competitor is Amazon. And Amazon is really running away with it. So there's that. What else do I have here? In other words, if coded corrections by AI potentially causing... No, I'm gonna have to cut that out. I thought I was asking a really good question here, but no, I wrote down a bunch of words and I messed it up. I don't know what I was thinking at that point. I will say this though. AI, anything, doesn't seem like it has a cap, at least in my eyes. But I also can't see any form of AI not having a flaw. At the end of the day, it's an electronic, you know, if one day oil runs out and then like the electrical grid goes off, you know, and then we don't have electricity for like 100 years. I'm exaggerating, but the point is, it's like, you know, there's no longer going to be AI. So it has a fundamental weakness. You know, you could probably just push a robot into a pool. You know, it's like just like that. You're good. Assuming the robot doesn't have the strength to do whatever it needs to do at that point. But anyways, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that even in the code, because part of what AI does, and if somebody who's a genius at AI is watching this, you know, they're cringing hard, but you know, bear with me here. If you have an AI system on some level, what makes it artificially intelligent is its capacity to learn and then output what it learned in some coherent way that follows the momentum and flow of human civilization. Right? So by virtue of that, it's going to have flaws. And part of the human flow and part of the nature of human beings is that no matter how much we learn, we're still messing up all the time. And it's the error that makes us learn. And so I think the idea of errors, has a massive role to play. And because it's always going to be there as a variable, I don't even think that AI is going to reach a level of perfection. It may not have a cap, but I don't think it's going to be perfect. And I think that aspect of it is sort of why I'm not really like completely frightened by it. I am frightened by its short-term nuisance, let's say. You know, somebody's reputation could get temporarily ruined, but, you know, before somebody figures out it's like, oh, it was just an AI generated whatever. Anyways, to me, it seems that because our motivations differ from an AI system for now, and we have more at stake than a potentially mass-produced robot, let me put it like this. Even though AI is scary, in that same breath, you can't also underestimate what humans can do. And so to me, it seems that because our motivations, so I'm kind of repeating this, but to me, it seems that because our motivations differ from an AI system for now, and we have more at stake than a potentially mass-produced robot, what was I trying to write down here? Circling this back, kind of to one of the things why I was kind of talking about all of that. One of the bullet points that I had written down, because I was on the topic of AI having flaws. AI is going to be incredibly powerful, but again, I just wondered to what extent it can correct errors, because it's going to correct errors, but in doing so, it's going to open up doors for other errors. And there's always one like superordinate error, right? Which is the fact that it like runs on electricity, for now, unless I think we might be screwed the day that like robots can create robots are their own energy source, and it's not through electricity. So like it's clear from rain, and I don't know. I don't want to get into the details of it. The point is again, I just think that AI just has its limits. As much as like it doesn't seem that it has a cap, I just think it's limited. And I know I've repeated that point a bunch of times, and I think because what I'm trying, the real thing that I'm trying to get to, because all of this was on the topic of self-checkouts. So it's like, how do we go from your friendly neighborhood ShopRite to talking about AI? Self-checkouts are actually more of a form of automation, and artificial intelligence is a different form of automation. And that's kind of why I'm bringing those two together, is because they're just both forms of automation. And I think there's going to be, what I'm trying to get at is, because automation is the real core of all of that. It's how fast can we really do something? I know that sounds so silly, but it's and in doing so, in trying to create all these wild forms of automation, they're just going to be flawed, man. Self-checkouts worked for a really long time, relatively speaking. Worked for a solid chunk of years, and then all of a sudden, Walmart's like, yo, we're getting robbed day in, day out in the inner cities. Pretty much everywhere, but it was a lot of it was in the inner cities. They're losing a lot of money, and you can't, again, from a business perspective, you can't really blame them. So what $98 a year, then you can use the self-checkouts. I don't like that, but I don't blame them. I'll put it that way. I do not like that, but I do not blame them. So I had a lot of really high moments during this middle segment, and luckily I have these Drigo takes. So as I was going through my thought processes on this topic, I really enjoyed the nuance of it all. And however small it is, it could be a symptom of a core flaw in the general AI computing sphere. Perhaps the intelligence of Mother Nature and God, perhaps the intelligence that Mother Nature / God created is and will reign king for a long, long time, as we have been already. On the deep end of this rabbit hole, I will say that my brain envisions that we are in a simulation conversation and the AI conversation all in one. That we are having those two conversations all in one. A world in which was not a simulation to begin with, but ends in a quasi world controllable simulation. A world in which things like weather and consciousness can really be directed and controlled. Because up until now, it's all been indirect control. Even physical control is indirect, for example, because one can change their mind and revolt. But in a direct control simulation, let's say, every thought is controlled. And if a human impulse is created in the brain, the code, quote unquote, the quote unquote code eliminates said thought. Yeah, that's the deep end. I was kind of reading there. That's the deep end of where my brain took me. And I can't see the bottom of that. So I'm going to kind of swim back to shore. So the final point that I want to say on this topic is that it's more of an opinion, actually, is that corporations are going through a change, or at least they have to go through a change. So I guess like some corporations are going through a change, and then a lot of them have to. You know, they have to. They don't have a choice. My experience with corporate manufacturing, with the corporate manufacturing mix, is not good. I had no issues with the manufacturing aspect of things. As a matter of fact, it was actually awesome. I had terrible experience with the corporate side of things, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because they have a lot of say in what happens in a company. You know, the physical output is usually on part of the machines and the human labor, but by that point, the decisions have already been made by the people in the suit and ties. So that's kind of why I'm bringing them back up. And corporate America is not turning out to be very pretty. Not at all. I do not like it. And so that is why I'm bringing up that I've had a terrible experience with corporate. And I know I'm not the only one. They get way too involved, you know? Safety became such an issue that it was counterproductive. I don't have an issue with safety alone, but I had an issue with the goal sometimes. Let me not say the goal. Because yeah, let me put it that way. I'll re-say that and then add the context. I do not have an issue with safety, but I had an issue with the goal. Now, real quick, the goal from a corporate perspective is safety. So it's like, Drigo, what do you mean by that? Again, I don't have an issue with safety, but when they say that their goal is safety, that's a load of fucking shit. All right. don't ever, if a corporation ever says that, it's a load of shit. What the hell? Damn, bro. Why does Siri always have to? Siri's always messing things up for me. Wow. Okay, so I have sort of an issue. This is actually not good. Not good at all. My camera's on 20% battery, and I'm not even into the juicy stuff of this episode. Yeah. All right, that's something I'm gonna have to figure out. Oh man. Yeah, that was wild. Siri really distracted me there. But at least it gave me notice that I have 19% on this camera. I may just continue on this camera right here. I really don't have an issue. I kind of just don't want to. I don't want to have to do too much post production. I have everything right now set up in a way so that when I get into post production, it's 1, 2, 3, and I could fucking export. Anyways, I'll continue, and then if that battery dies, I'll I'll just maintain this camera, and I'll probably just talk to camera number 3 the whole time. So let's get back to it. Yeah, terrible experiences with corporate. Not fun. Not fun. They bullshit on what they say their goals are, and then they put it under the guise of some sort of euphemism, and sometimes that euphemism is safety. So that's why I say it's a load of shit. They know, everybody knows that the lawyers are watching and that we're all here because of the lawyers. So, you know, nobody's going to blatantly say, yeah, we have to basically bubble wrap everybody and everything that they're working on because of lawyers. Nobody's ever going to flat out say that. So that's no cool. No bueno. No bueno. Where am I here on my list of bullet points? Right. Another thing regarding, I guess, like the enforcement of these, or at least the unorthodox approaches from corporations is, and this is from the perspective of an employee. The interruptive enforcement was combined with the pressure from the top for production. That was always such a big deal because the demands from the top of the hierarchy were always increased, but the resources were always degenerating, and the demands for safety were always prominent and increased. And the thing about safety is, rarely do you increase speed and production time being more safe. So everybody's in this weird cloud. They got their suit and tie and they drive into work with their freaking Teslas. So they're like, listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to Ignacio. I got a suit and tie and you need to listen to me. And it's like, who are you, bruh? Who are you? You can't. Corporations are so in their own world. Part of what makes corporate dynamic unworkable is that it's very, it's not unified at all. It really is dog eat dog. It's a dog eat dog world in the corporate, in the corporate world. And some may say, oh, well, you need that. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. In the manufacturing and, background logistical processes, that's where I've done a lot of my work. And even in the, just in the labor sector in general, the general employee is always down to move up, not only just in pay scale, but in the hierarchy with their coworkers. It's people that you struggle with in the early goings. Sometimes two people really hate their job, but that's the thing that they got in common, and you'd be surprised how much that can carry on and how much momentum that can create. And so the reason I'm bringing all that up is there's a level of resentment that starts to grow when you really get in the way. And the dog eat dog mentality that corporate America takes face of, it's not productive at all. And when it is, it's very short term. It's very, very short term. I've seen some very, very high grade corporate workers that maybe either quit their job or got fired within 6 months to a year. And if they didn't, within that year, if they were still in that position, their reputation was tainted some way, shape, or form, even if it wasn't true. It's just, no. For me, it just was not it. So I think I really liked writing this episode because a lot of things still, everything that caught my interest and that I was writing about really tied together amazingly. Because now this is a wonderful segue into what the hell is going on with Boeing. Wow. I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked. But it's like, wow, it's going down. It's going down right now. I don't mean like the company's collapsing. I'm just saying like it's going down. You know, like it ain't going up. On this topic, I didn't even know where to start. Even though I have everything kind of like written down and all my bullet points written down, I still don't even know where the hell to start, man. This case is giving me the same vibes. Not the same. This case is giving me. I shouldn't say this case. What's going on at Boeing is like a long and slightly painful, with like a compound effect over time, version of the Titan sub implosion. It's not like exactly the same, but it's kind of giving me those vibes. Because at the helm of both, there's a bit of corporate negligence. Now, the difference between Boeing and the company who I can't recall that was running the Titan sub, two completely different size companies and market share and market cap and all that stuff. That's not what I'm kind of alluding to. I know that they're two completely different companies of its orders of magnitude, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the corporate negligence that can affect a small company or an absolutely massive behemoth of a company. So, what do we make of that? The corporate negligence was being called out on both of those occasions, and not occasions, in both of those, within both of those companies regarding their incidents, the corporate negligence was called out. So I shouldn't say corporate negligence. There was some sort of negligence. And in both cases, they were ignored. And then in both of those companies, when those things were called out, the incidents preceded them. Right? I don't know if that's the proper word. I just had a high moment. The incidents followed it. To me, it's starting to feel like corporate America is made up of companies that run their business in some sort of dictatorship way, which I find absolutely ironic. You know, you run a dictatorship within a capitalistic structure. Is it exactly like a dictatorship? No. I think there's a lot of companies doing a lot of really good things, even in corporate America. I know that in the manufacturing and logistics realm, it's a lot of really tough work, but a lot of good things are happening. They're making things move. They're keeping the world moving. They're keeping commerce moving. And so that's not what I'm getting at. But I'll put it like this, right? In a dictatorship, some of the symptoms that the system doesn't work is how information gets relayed, who's relaying the information, and what the information even is. And I guess that also implies the level of importance of the information. But here in the States, the logistics of information are completely out of whack. It's not cool. It doesn't work. I haven't really seen it work all that well at all. Um, you can get penalized for saying the wrong thing, which again, it reminds me of like a dictatorship. You know, that there is no free speech in corporate or private America. There isn't. There's a free speech in capitalism, but there isn't free speech in the details. Um, I bring that up because again, in both of these companies, we have two people that were, I essentially fired and brought to trial. I can't remember to what extent everything that happened in the Titan sub, but I know that both of those attributes followed at least one of each of these. Um, and basically the whistleblowers, I in this case, the whistleblower is no longer alive. But we'll get to that shortly. Um, Again, you could get penalized for just like speaking out on the company. Essentially, it's absolutely wild. And the amount of leverage that these corporations and companies have by the time that there's a whistleblower is ridiculous. In the case where the truth is productive and positive, sometimes the credit can also be taken from the original source. So the reason for even talking about these specifics is because on the negative side, people get penalized for speaking out. So this just reminds me of how both the Soviet Union, modern Russia, Nazi Germany, etc., relayed information to their respective leaders. When the positive was when the positive when the information was positive. No, let me put it like this: the way information flowed to the top was set up in such a way, or at least set up and evolved into such a way that the level of mistrust made it so that whether the news was positive or negative didn't matter, because basically everything was taken with a grain of salt. And because another thing, I'll even add in another aspect of information is that sometimes when it's positive, like I said, the credit can be taken from the original source. So there was a lot. It created a lot of resentment. Um, People want to take credit for others' information, and the issue is with that sort of lie, is that certain employees or government officials that steal information from other sources don't have the capacity, the intuitive capacity to generate that sort of information for themselves. So they never end up lasting a long time anyways. So it creates this terrible cycle of messed up information that barely even gets relayed to the right people in the end anyways. So again, this just reminds me all of how the Soviet Union, modern Russia, and all those sort of dictatorships, fascist, communistic countries and civilizations just could not get the proper information through. The information logistics was so out of whack. By the end, the incentive to relay information is basically gone. So that's why it's no good. It's set up for failure. So bringing this back to now here, because all the meanwhile there's an underlying economic fear in the States due to inflation. So when you want to put that onus on the employees to give you the proper information when you're not even paying them all that well, or at least they feel like they're not getting paid all that well for their job, and they're dealing with this corporate America kind of stuff, there's no incentive. There's no incentive. So there's always the economics of the country that the employee is in that is also kind of working in the background. And I guess the reason why I put that bullet point there is because it really alludes to the fact that a lot of companies are not paying attention to the overall picture in being responsible for their employees. By hiring somebody, you take on that responsibility. So somebody could say, well, the employee shouldn't have applied to such and such. It's like, fine, fair enough, but also companies have a responsibility when you're hiring people. That they're feeding their families with that. So, anyways, where are we? So, all that basically that creates an intolerance and resentment among the employees and the individuals because it causes immediate disparity in income. And it's especially nowadays with how information gets around and how easy it is to talk to different companies and employers and see what you can get for certain positions and for certain jobs. And even in the States, the level at which you can just be an entrepreneur and just do things on your own, it's ridiculous. So again, all this, I'm tying this all back to how information is getting relayed and the effects of the terrible informational logistics that's going on. One thing I learned about larger companies, especially regarding information given to investors, is that expansions require additional employees. Add in the resentment and intolerance that current employees are already experiencing. You get employee turnover rates that end up being absolutely absurd. They're not pretty at all. When you constantly swift through a lot of employees very quickly, the quality of work diminishes just as quickly, and it might even be quicker. Excuse me. Yeah, this is a bad cycle because it means that bad employees get fired and then replaced by even worse employees. And all of that was happening because the good employees either left or got fired in the first place. Usually they get pushed away. Again, circling this back to how other employees how other employers and different companies treat current employees really changes the scope and perspective of the employee and individuals themselves. So I'm going to just dip out of here. And so good employees know their worth. And so companies really have to be careful with how they're treating their best employees. This kind of goes back to that whole equality argument. Yeah, no, this is what happens. That's what quasi socialism looks like. When you equalize a playing ground, incentives get lost. It's not just incentive to work, it's incentive to how information is relayed. It carries on to general motivations outside of work for the individuals. So it's no good. Everything completely plateaus. And in a really obscure way, plateauing is the same as going backwards. In the real world, society has to move forward. It can't plateau. So things like socialism and making things equal for everybody, it's no good. It legit just doesn't work. It ruins things for everybody. So either some people have to take the L or everybody takes the L. I'll vote for some. If that some is me, so be it. At least I had a chance to not take an L. But if everybody's taking the L and there's no chance, nah. So again, that's why I find it kind of ironic that these companies are running in such a way while using a capitalistic structure. It's a paradox, and it's no wonder why it's not working. And as we move forward, we're going to see, because I want to circle this back to Boeing. Corporate negligence, again, is the talk of the subject. For those that aren't aware, again, there is a whistleblower. He's dead now. It was ruled suicide very quickly. There's no official autopsy yet as of March 20th, 2024. I almost forgot today's date. I basically finished writing this earlier today. I don't know the physical details. In other words, like, I'm not sure of the legitimacy of that claim, of the claim that it was suicide. I ended up reading afterwards that basically the gunshot wound was inflicted to the temple on the right side, and they found him in his truck. But that there's no, apparently there was no foul play. But as we move forward, we're going to see. The gentleman's name was John Barnett. I also have a couple links that I'm going to be pasting in the description for this as well, because this gets very interesting. The article that I found is titled "The Strange Death of a Boeing Whistleblower." Very good article. Basically, the article points out, gives a little background. He worked as a quality assurance inspector at Boeing. And to me, the second paragraph of the article was interesting. It mentions that Boeing's view on quality assurance is frivolous. Basically, they find it redundant. That also mentions that head assurers like John were overwhelmed by about, let's say, 3 times the work personnel normally seen in other Boeing factories. 3 times might not sound like much, but again, if you read the article, you can see the exact numbers. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Supposedly, John was also left with dealing with workers that were like flipping burgers the month prior. So that's no fun for John. Every day. So this is actually a quote from his brother that was recalled in emails. Every day was a battle to get Boeing management to do the right thing. The article alone has so many things that I could touch upon. This case is definitely going to be some sort of like multi-episode deal, because there is so much going on here. There is so much going on with this case. I don't want to become some sort of reporter, but I just look, there's things that have to be talked about, and I relate to a lot of the things that are happening here heavily, because in the company that I worked for previously, I was working in manufacturing logistics, and corporate was in everybody's face every day. It was beyond ridiculous. But anyways, we'll get to that. Yeah, this case really reminds me of the stresses that I had to work with that. So to segue into my views, first I want to bring up a letter from the FAA to Boeing on January 10th of this year regarding an in-service incident on a 737-9 MAX. That letter will be linked below. Basically, this statement means that if Boeing has a production certificate, essentially a permission to produce aircraft, they must make sure that every aircraft or part that they produce with that certificate meets 2 conditions. 1, it matches the approved design, and 2, it is safe to operate. So to add some detail, because it sounds sounds a little too simple, to add some detail, it means that the parts that are used are ones that are built exactly according to the design that was approved. So when there's a design, has to get approved, and then the part has to be exactly like that one. And then the second one is the aircraft and or part that is being selected for said use is in the proper condition to operate. So you can say like, okay, yeah, I'm using the part that was approved by the design, but let's say the part is rusty. The part is no longer in condition. Even if it's that exact part that was approved via certificate and everything, if it's not in the proper condition, the part is no good. So it has to meet those two things. Matches the approved design and it is safe to operate. I bring up the statement because it ends with auditing. Auditing in corporate America is very obscure and very odd for me. It's always a matter of time before the auditors get audited. As stated before, Boeing finds quality assurance frivolous. Unfortunately, this is true, but what a company does with that truth/information is what matters to me. Because that doesn't. Let me continue. Actually, there has to be an overhaul on how corporate and manufacturing dynamics can intermingle with each other. We have to remember that they intermingle because of safety, and safety in my eyes, personally, Drigo here means information safety, worker safety, company safety, physical and or mental safety. So information, worker, company, physical, mental safety. Those things to me are all under the umbrella of what a company means when they say safety. Or at least that's what it should. That's what I envision. I know it's not what it is, but that's what I envision. It's not just about like if a worker falls off, for example. So that would be like physical safety. That also includes way of working safety as well, but I guess those are kind of like broken down in the ones that I said before. So again, I agree to the extent as is, and if you treat it as such, that quality assurance can be frivolous. The thing is, human error is a thing and is real and it exists. So if it's not taken into account, then you can't complain. And so it's never going to be perfect. But when you just say, nah, you know what? All this shit is just frivolous. Let's just keep working and let's just kind of ignore it. And again, have that neglect for it. That's when you get those two 737 MAX planes that had the MCAS issue that ended up in tragedy. And then there's the other, I think there's even like a 737-800 that even though it wasn't one of the newer production planes, it was still a Boeing plane, and it's just not a good look. And this is kind of why it starts to attack certain things, even if it's not directly correlated to the issue. And there's just so much negligence. It's hold on, before I even get lost here. Right, because I agree, man. Safety can really be redundant. For that reason, because of its redundancy and add in its necessity, because you can find it frivolous, but that doesn't mean that you have to completely neglect it like Boeing is doing right now. Even though those two things are at play, how can I say this properly without not only confusing myself and or anybody who's listening? If you have taking into account the necessity and the redundancy of quality assurance and safety, if you're at the top of the hierarchy in management, you have to recognize those two things, that you need it and that it takes time. And if you make claims to investors or to anybody at the top of at the top of the hierarchy, you're making promises that you cannot keep, or that you aren't fully knowledgeable, that you're pushing the thresholds of the redundancy, something is wrong. People begin to feel the pressure on the lower ends of the employment hierarchy when they're busy taking care of safety, because everybody knows safety is the number one priority. Again, I don't have an issue with safety. I have an issue with what companies regard to as safety and their lack of awareness of the redundancy of it. I guess that those two statements are sort of the same, because the implications are that if you don't know what you really mean by safety, then you definitely don't know that it takes a while for quality assurance to do its job, and for safety to be for safety to have the proper outcome, or at least the one that was intended or envisioned. Those things take time, and Airbus was cornering Boeing for many years ago in the market. Airbus was catching up. Then they came out with, I believe it was the A320neo. Boeing freaked out. They rushed, and they went into reactive mode, not proactive mode. And since that day, things have not been going well. So it's tragic. It's tragic because these companies have so much leverage that, I don't know exactly what's going to happen of Boeing, but they're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So now this is why I say it's a multi-episode issue, because now conversations of ticket prices for other planes and potentially other airplane manufacturers that are American, this really starts to open up that market for them. They may be years and years and years behind Boeing, but so was Airbus. And, Airbus wasn't even around for, I think it had to have been like the better part of like 50 years since Boeing's inception. So look, anything can happen. And when one of the top American airline manufacturers is going down, man, it part of the capitalistic nature is it's going to do its job and create another company to take it over. So I know no Boeing executive is going to be watching this, but man, if by like the 0.0000001% chance that like one of these big, even if you're not a Boeing executive and you're just an executive in general, again, no chance you're watching this right now. But in this crazy off chance that you are, my message to you is it's going to be more expensive right now to invest in your in the lower parts of the hierarchy, not the materials, the people, the resources, the people/resources, but those bring much better fruits at the end of the day. If money is what you're worried about losing, then invest in the lower parts of the hierarchy and watch your wallets grow. It's what Airbus is doing, and they overtook Boeing. Hello, so run a company like socialism or communism. If you're running your company like Marx would run a company, in an ironic twist of an ironic what's the word I'm looking for? Not anecdote. I don't know. I'm having a high moment. Anyways, I just think that statement is ironic. If you're running a company like that, you end up like what Boeing is right now. Even if you're still around for a few more years or for a couple more decades, your reputation is starting to get really tainted, and you start to get into damage control, and nothing good comes from damage control. So the Drigo take on all this is I started this Boeing topic by simply asking what the hell is going on right now at the company. And what we know, and again, the Drigo take is that they have multiple incidents on American soil, which is perceived as a safe area to fly commercially. Whenever I'm in the United States and I'm flying, man, I feel safe as hell. I immediately fall asleep on those planes. Not to say that like when I'm outside the country, I don't feel safe. I also feel very safe still, but on American soil, it's like even more so. I mean, I feel like almost invincible, you know. Um, so I know I'm not. Just saying. So to see these incidents happen to an American company on American soil, well, in American air and then soil, unfortunately, it sucks. It's not good. It's not good because I know I'm not the only one that perceives America as like the safest nation to fly in. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Again, I'm talking about perception. I perceive it to be very safe. Second thing is that there's potentially a homicide conspiracy case involving John Barnett. That's absolutely wild. The article attached has a few more details on him. I say a few more details. The article is very good. It has a lot more details. It really gives the feeling of like, all right, this is what we know so far. Like it doesn't feel like the reporter held back. So good on them. Boeing's response to Airbus's A320 and market takeover is showing severe symptoms that everything they are doing is rushed. Yeah. Quality assurance is frivolous because it is redundant. Redundancy is slow by nature. Rushing it to meet investor quotas, catch up in the market, or rushing the process in general has a massively negative effect downstream. There is a lag between pressure from the top until it gets all the way to the bottom. There is a massive lag between that relay in information and consequence. And then back up, right? Because it bounces sort of like a basketball. You can't have rush demands or wild expectations from the top and a great quality assurance program as a result in the output. What you can have are realistic expectations within the company, excluding investor opinion and interaction, and a system set up for flow. A flowing system, like a stream, is rocky and muddy in some areas, even has some big rocks in it, but the water flows at the same pace as if there was no total obstruction at all. The human, as a matter of fact, actually sort of on the anecdote of the river, a lot of the stream is the steady flow is already taking into account the obstruction. If it was completely smooth, the stream would flow that much faster. But normally a stream, you'll see it has a steady pace. The pace is usually actually dictated more by input rather than the surface area at all. And it's usually the input that changes the landscape. But anyways, now I'm going into the details of the anecdote, even though they all fit. Again, for the purpose of this conversation, though, human error in conjunction with modern advancements in mental health and higher standards in physical safety means that there's going to be a lot more downtime among individuals. This doesn't mean, however, that the overall flow has to have a downtime. It's just more the individual. There's going to be a few more breaks, a few more days off, hours and ways of working are going to change. So on the individual level, you're going to see spurts of people, probably taking more time off than they would have probably, let's say, 50, 60, 70 years ago. But things have changed, Again, the advancements in mental health and higher standards in physical safety means that there's going to be a lot more downtime among individuals. This is only possible if the people with leverage in companies' hierarchy, and if only the people with leverage in a company's hierarchy set realistic expectations that they can delegate well enough to meet without costing the employee or cost of the employee. This is sometimes more fiscally demanding, as I was saying before. This is sometimes the more fiscally demanding route. I can't speak right now. And this is where the core problem in general, this is where the core problem is in a general sense. Once you create an environment where employees know that they're being taken advantage of, your turnover rate increases. Until that environment is changed, the turnover rate will get worse, and so will the employees. Again, that's more of like an exponential compounding thing, because the hierarchies still cycle through, and so some of those bad employees, they never end up getting fired, and they never leave themselves. A few of them stick, and they start to climb up, and like it's sort of like a virus, and then like before you know it, the company 10, 20, 30 years later down the line is not even the same company anymore. It just has the same logo, if it's even still around, because typically bad employees who climb up the hierarchies and take it over, those companies don't last that long. Anyways, that's again for a different topic. Where was I? Right. And actually, this is actually a good time to touch on an example that was stated in the article. That actually happens to the point where you're left with the burger flipping employees indirectly handling the lives of thousands of people. I don't know the deeply legitimate nature of like if they were actually flipping burgers, but even if that wasn't the case, I totally get what was meant by that, even if that was a hyperbole. Because the thing about a turnover rate, if it's going in the negative direction, is that one, it has a compound effect again. And then two, it never, as every day that it gets worse, it creates less and less of an incentive for good employees to stay. So it really creates a terrible cycle. And that even if a good manager ends up replacing a bad manager with a terrible turnover rate cycle already in play, if that manager makes good decisions, sometimes it through none of the fault of the manager, those good employees, those good decisions that the manager made, they never stick. So it's a terrible cycle. It's a terrible cycle. And the size of these companies are basically the only things that are stopping it, because it's just buying them a lot of time. And it's not impossible to recover from it. I've never really seen it, but I can't say that it's impossible. But it definitely ain't easy. It definitely ain't easy, because imagine if it's you get hired to a company, seems great, and then after like 6 weeks that you're there, you're like, no, this is freaking hell. Even sometimes you might like your manager, the company itself is just not a place to be. You see no opportunity. Other managers are no good. So it's again, I could go on for hours on that topic, but the point is these terrible turnover rates. It brings some truth to the burger flipping employee. If it is true, then unreal how you could end up again with somebody who is flipping burgers 1 month and then responsible for the thousands of lives the next. So wild topic. Corporate negligence is indeed the issue, but that doesn't do any justice to the severity of the issue. In the previous company that I worked for, all of this is happening right now as we speak. And I guess what I meant by that previous line is that the term corporate negligence doesn't do any justice to the severity of the issue. Again, the term corporate negligence doesn't do any justice. It's the truth. It's what's going on, but it just doesn't do any justice. Again, I almost find it akin to like the way a virus works. Eventually certain bad employees will climb up the ranks, and then make the decisions that end up bringing down the company. And a lot of that is happening, again, like I said, in the company that I used to work for right now as we speak. I've seen it with my own eyes, and we're all seeing it here with Boeing. Let's see what else. I think I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I'm going to read it anyways. You get worse employees over time, which means meeting demands becomes more difficult. This, in turn, to avoid stock tickers from going down, means that false information ends up getting broadcasted. Raising company expectations is a good sign, but it's only actually good if the company has room to raise those expectations. Essentially, what I'm saying is that certain expectations get raised to kind of give the illusion that the company's doing really well. I remember, I'll just say it. I used to work for a company called ASML. Fantastic company, but again, a lot of this is about specifically corporate, not necessarily the manufacturing aspect of it. Corporate basically demanded that we clean up all of our workstations before we had to tour. And so that would also mean hiding problems and hiding issues. And it's like, no, the tour should really be to show people like, yo, these are the issues and here's how we're going to solve them. And sometimes those tours were investors and sometimes those tours were the CEO. And all we did for everything was just clean everything up. So nobody ever saw any of the problems. People just thought that we were running a perfect company. And so in turn of that, now it's like, okay, well, you can't have plateauing or lowering expectations if everything looks peachy. So now it's like you're left with no option but to raise the expectations of output on the company. So with that said, raising expectations to investors and other in-company stakeholders essentially is a good sign, but it's not actually good if it's not true. It's very obscure on how it comes to light. So where was I here? Right. To avoid losing their jobs, the upper parts of the hierarchy lobby for themselves in whichever way possible. That's corporate politics. And squeeze as many pennies as they can because they know that they're in a terrible cycle. It's so evident. You can really feel it. And sometimes a lot of people can't really articulate the elephant in the room, but it's really what it is. Everybody fucking sucks, and you're working with all these people, and some people even know that they suck. That's the most wild part about like working in corporate is like some people know that they're terrible, but they know that they have certain types of leverage, and man, they just keep it pushing, bro. They just keep it pushing. Speaking of keeping it pushing, let's go here. It's getting late. So, competent hierarchies don't let this sort of stuff happen in the first place. And if it usually does, it doesn't happen for too long. Like it's kind of like you could put the fire out relatively quickly. But especially let alone to the extent where 4 or 5 years later, lives are still at risk. There's so much to talk about here. And as of writing this, I don't know how long in the recording I'm actually in. And I know I am in, we're about 2 hours in. But again, there's just so much I can talk about this, and I could go on forever. So this is definitely probably going to be like a multi-episode thing. Am I going to do it every episode? No, but if I get like newer updates, and if one of the topics in an episode kind of come up, and then I'll definitely bring it up at that point. But I'll sort of cap off this episode with this. What do I make of this situation, and what do I think is going to happen to Boeing? The severity of the issues is not shocking to me at all. Many of my former coworkers, if any, see this, will know that I've stressed for years that ASML's logistics flow is horrible, and I used Boeing as an example, saying that though the company may not collapse, it's going to be overtaken and lose massive leverage in the market. Market share may only be affected a little bit, but the market leverage and social leverage is like out the window. I guess what I mean by social leverage is like reputation. I don't know why I said social leverage. I guess it's the same thing. The aviation industry is raising its standards dramatically year after year. And so companies like Boeing take massive hits. When companies like Boeing take massive hits to their reputations, it's extremely difficult to come back from that. Is it impossible? No. And that's why I'm not predicting some sort of like major Boeing collapse. There's still time and resources to come back. They're an absolutely massive company. However, is there complete immunity from the collapse? No, also. There can still be a collapse. I just think that the U.S. government needs a company like Boeing, and there's no company that can meet the U.S.'s current aviation standards and output that Boeing still can do. Sikorsky's got the choppers, but Boeing's got the planes. The U.S. government isn't going to run to European Airbus and give Europe the rights to American government aviation. So, we're stuck with Boeing for quite a while. And this is kind of why I mean, like, look, they can still come back. That they have still a lot of leverage, but the reputation is starting to get really tainted here. My overall take comes from when I was a painter. The prep work should take longer than the actual painting job. It makes the job of painting easier, and you make a lot less mistakes in the final product. Usually it's perfect. Usually the final product was perfect. The prep work was a pain in the ass and definitely not perfect at all. But it was to the point where we should have almost been called preppers, not painters. But it was commercial painting, not like Picasso painting. So anyways, this is to say that Airbus did their due diligence in setting up a supply chain and network that really allows for progress and safety. They did all the prep work, making the production job seem effortless. Boeing, on the other hand, when they took a punch from Airbus, they immediately went into reactive mode, not proactive mode. No prep work. They reacted with a plane that put them past reactive mode and into damage control mode years later. So that was all to say that nothing good comes from companies in damage control that are currently undergoing damage control. And so as consumers, all we can do is beware of what we're spending our trust on, which is the most beautiful loop to all this, and that's the other reason why I enjoyed writing this, because all the way from Boeing to self-checkouts to the bans on social platforms that we're putting our livelihoods and our kids and stuff at stake, and where we're getting our food at self-checkouts, and how money is flowing from our pockets into others and others into ours, blah, 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 and our own personal lives at stake in the manufacturing market. In the manufacturing domain, I mean, we have to just beware. The best we can do is just beware of what we're spending our trust on. Not just spending our money on, but what we're spending our trust on. A lot of people have to start asking questions differently, even if the question doesn't hold up for now. Sometimes, like, if you just hold on to the question itself, it may hold on to something at some other point. There's a lot of things that we can't predict. And so, again, that's kind of why I'm saying we just have to be careful what we're spending our trust on. Sort of like I said in the first episode, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I had a mental blast writing this episode. It was exhausting. And it was exhausting not because of the amount of content that was written, because not a lot was like written, like, I could scroll for a bit, but a lot of it is just bullet points. It's exhausting because there's so many things that I wanted to talk about, but I can't have a 10-hour podcast. I just can't do that. I would, my dry mouth and my ass would fall asleep on this fucking chair. I don't have enough water to last me to just fucking, sit through that much. And yeah, no, it would just be too much. But I did have fun because I did want to talk about this, and I think this was like the perfect length to everything. So with all that, again, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This has been the Drigo podcast. Not exactly sure when I'm releasing another episode, but to the few people who've commented and who viewed the videos, and to the people, to close friends and family who've seen my my videos, I've gotten nothing but awesome reviews, even just from the first cringy episode. So I have a lot of high hopes. This is really fun doing this. I can't wait for the next one, really. And I might bring back Boeing. Who knows? We're about to find out. Because again, bro, there's like a freaking homicide case. But anyways, again, I could go on forever. Thanks for watching. If you see this, you can follow me on Instagram at Drigo Rose. I don't know what my Twitter is yet, but I don't have that set up. So I'll definitely post my X profile. It's not Twitter anymore. My X profile on the next one. So on Instagram, you could just follow me at Drigo Rose. And if you're watching this, obviously on YouTube, subscribe, like, stay tuned for the next one. Again, You know, I may have wasted somebody's time, but on the next one, I promise I'll even waste a little bit less time. So, vamos, let's get the fuck out of here. Have a good night. Or if you're watching this in the morning, have a good rest of your morning. If you're watching this in the afternoon, have a good rest of your afternoon. Cheers. Peace out.